There are television shows that entertain, and then there are television shows that endure. Home Improvement was the kind of series that planted itself firmly in the living rooms of American families throughout the 1990s and refused to leave. Week after week, millions of viewers tuned in to watch Tim Taylor blow things up, grunt at power tools, and stumble through the beautiful chaos of domestic life with a warmth that felt genuinely real. But what most of those viewers never knew, what stayed hidden behind the laugh tracks and the perfectly timed comedic disasters, was just how fragile that world actually was. The show that looked so effortless on screen was built on a series of near misses, risky decisions, personal struggles, and behind-the-scenes tensions that could have unraveled everything long before it became the cultural landmark it eventually did. The secrets that shape Home Improvement are more surprising than anything that ever happened on the fictional set of Tool Time, and uncovering them changes the way you see every single episode. It starts with the man himself, because without Tim Allen's specific and stubborn insistence on doing things his way, there would have been no show at all. Before Home Improvement made him a household name, Allen was one of the most exciting stand-up comedians working in America. His routines about masculinity, tools, and the absurdity of domestic life were connecting with audiences in ways that made network executives sit up and take notice. Naturally, the offers started coming in, and naturally, Allen kept turning them down. The projects being pitched to him asked him to play diluted versions of sitcom fathers who had nothing to do with who he actually was on stage. They wanted him to step into someone else's mold, to sand down the edges that made him interesting, and to become just another face in the long line of television dads. Allen wasn't interested in any of that. He had spent years building a comedic identity that felt authentic, and he wasn't about to trade away for a paycheck, and a primetime slot that didn't fit. What finally changed his mind was a pitch that approached the problem from a completely different direction. Instead of asking Allen to fit into something pre-existing, producers decided to build something around him. Tim Taylor would be an extension of Allen's actual comedy, a man obsessed with tools and power and the complicated rituals of masculinity, bumbling through family life with the same energy Allen brought to his live performances. This level of creative input was extraordinarily rare for someone making their television debut. Most first-time stars were handed scripts and told to show up. Allen was handed something that actually resembled his life, and that difference made everything possible. But even after the show was greenlit and production began, the foundation was shakier than anyone publicly admitted. The pilot episode that eventually introduced the world to the Taylor family was not the first version that was filmed. In the original pilot, the role of Jill Taylor was played by an entirely different actress. And when test audiences watched the results, the response was underwhelming in the most alarming way possible. The chemistry between the leads felt wrong. The dynamic that was supposed to anchor the entire series felt flat, unconvincing, and emotionally hollow. Executives were staring at a significant problem with everything on the line. The decision that followed was expensive, risky, and absolutely necessary. They recast the role and reshoot the pilot, bringing in Patricia Richardson to play Jill Taylor, and the transformation was immediate and undeniable. Everything that had felt forced and artificial before suddenly found its rhythm. Richardson brought a groundedness and intelligence to the character that gave the show its emotional center, and her dynamic with Allen crackled with the kind of natural tension that audiences respond to instinctively. Very few people who watched the series during its 8-season run ever knew how close it came to dying before it ever aired. Reshooting a pilot is a gamble that networks almost never take twice, and the fact that it paid off so completely was nothing short of remarkable. Richardson's casting didn't just save the show, it gave it a soul. What also remained hidden from most audiences was a personal history that Tim Allen carried with him onto that set every single day. Before the comedy specials, before the network offers, before any of it, Allen's life had taken a turn that could have ended everything permanently. In 1978, he was arrested at an airport and later sentenced to more than 2 years in federal prison. The experience shattered whatever direction his life had been heading and forced a complete reckoning with who he was and what he wanted his future to look like. Comedy became both his escape and his rehabilitation, the thing he turned toward when everything else had collapsed. He rebuilt himself from scratch, working clubs and developing material until the talent that had always been there finally found the audience it deserved. The contrast between that chapter of his life and the image of the lovable, bumbling patriarch that millions of families welcomed into their homes every week is almost impossible to process. Viewers saw a man who couldn't fix a lawnmower without destroying the neighborhood, and had absolutely no idea they were watching someone who had already survived something genuinely devastating. Alan didn't accidentally stumble into success. He clawed his way back from a place most people never return from, and every laugh the show ever generated was built on top of that foundation. The surprises don't stop with the lead actor, because the man standing next to him almost didn't make it to set either. Al Borland, the flannel-wearing, infinitely patient, magnificently bearded psychic, who became one of the most beloved characters in 1990s television, was originally cast with a completely different actor in mind. That actor had to bow out due to scheduling conflicts before production could begin, leaving producers scrambling to fill a role that was central to the entire show-within-a-show concept. Richard Karn walked into that audition without any guarantee of what it might lead to, and what it led to was one of the greatest lucky accidents in sitcom history. Karn wasn't a recognizable name at the time. He was a working actor looking for something that might stick, and Al Borland gave him exactly that. His deadpan delivery, his genuine warmth, and his seemingly bottomless patience for Tim's catastrophic decision-making turned Al into a fan favorite almost in the first episode. The chemistry between Karn and Alan became one of the most reliable engines the series had, the kind of partnership that looks effortless on screen precisely because it works so naturally off it. Try to imagine Home Improvement without Al Borland's exasperated sighs and perfectly timed reactions, and you begin to understand how much the entire show depended on a last-minute casting change that could just as easily have gone wrong. The casting near misses weren't limited to the main players either. The audition process for the tool-time assistant role produced its own fascinating hidden story. Plenty of actresses came in to read for the part, but one particular candidate stood out in a way that actually became a problem. She was talented, she photographed beautifully, and her screen test was strong by any objective measure. The issue was that she carried too much presence for a role that was specifically designed to support the dynamic between Tim and Al rather than compete with it. Producers recognized that casting her risked pulling the entire center of gravity in the tool-time segments away from the comedic relationship that made them work. The decision not to cast her was purely about balance and fit, not about ability. But it was a decision with real consequences for the direction of the show. The actress moved on and built her own career elsewhere, while the series moved forward with someone whose energy complemented rather than challenged what was already there. It's a story that rarely gets told because there's no villain in it, just the kind of ruthlessly practical calculus that shapes every production in ways audiences never see. Timing and circumstance determined who ended up on screen, and a show that millions of people remember was a product of choices that could easily have produced something entirely different. At the height of its popularity, the series faced a crisis that had nothing to do with creative decisions or casting logistics. Tim Allen, the man whose face was synonymous with wholesome family entertainment and good-natured masculine incompetence, was arrested for driving under the influence during the peak years of the show. For a star whose entire public image was built around being the relatable, well-meaning dad that every American family could recognize and embrace, the incident posed a threat that went well beyond personal embarrassment. The show's brand was inseparable from Allen's image, and an image-damaging scandal at the wrong moment could have sent advertisers running and audiences questioning everything they thought they knew about the program. What followed was a remarkable exercise in crisis management, or perhaps simply fortunate timing. The story faded from public attention without generating the sustained headlines that could have turned it into a genuine catastrophe for everyone involved. The production continued without major disruption. The ratings held, and most viewers never became fully aware of how close the whole thing had come to imploding. What this episode reveals, more than anything else, is the thin line that separates triumph from disaster when you're operating at the top of the entertainment world. Allen was arguably the most successful sitcom star on American television at that moment, and one bad decision nearly dismantled everything he had built. Not every secret from behind the scenes involves crisis or near disaster. Some of the most interesting hidden stories are about the personal and creative inspirations that gave the show its distinctive character. Wilson W. Wilson Jr., the philosophical neighbor who dispensed wisdom from behind the fence, while keeping his face perpetually obscured, became one of the most genuinely memorable characters in the entire decade of 1990s television. and his origins were entirely personal. Tim Allen drew the character directly from a memory of a real neighbor he had known as a child growing up in Denver. That man had a habit of conducting conversations over the fence, and young Tim could never quite see his complete face during their exchanges. This specific memory, so particular and private, became the foundation of one of the show's most beloved creative conceits. What could have been a throwaway quirk became a defining characteristic that audiences spent 8 seasons trying to solve. The fact that Wilson's concealed face came from an actual childhood experience rather than a writer's room brainstorm gives the character a warmth and specificity that might explain why it resonated so deeply. Personal history was quietly shaping the show in ways that no viewer could have suspected, enriching the fiction with the texture of genuine human memory. And maintaining that particular creative choice required extraordinary commitment from everyone involved in production. Wilson's perpetually hidden face was never a happy accident or a fortunate camera angle. From the very first episode, concealing the lower half of Earl Hyman's face was a deliberate decision written into the show's foundational DNA. Every single scene Wilson appeared in required careful planning around fences, plants, coffee cups, and whatever else could plausibly obscure his features without the artifice becoming distracting. Directors had to think through each shot with Wilson's concealment as an act of creative constraint, and Hyman himself embraced the limitation with commitment that turned it into something approaching high art. The effort required to sustain this gag consistently across 8 seasons of television was genuinely considerable, and the fact that it never broke, never accidentally revealed what audiences weren't supposed to see, speaks to the professionalism of everyone involved. When the series finale finally arrived and Wilson stepped out from behind the fence during the curtain call to show his full face at last, it worked as a payoff precisely because the setup had been maintained so faithfully for so long. What started as a quirky idea became a testament to how much a production can achieve when it commits completely to something. Long before she became one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, Pamela Anderson was a regular presence on Home Improvement, playing Lisa, the tool-time assistant during the show's early seasons. The role gave her national exposure at exactly the moment her career needed a platform, and the 2 seasons she spent on the series provided the launching pad for everything that followed. Her departure after those 2 seasons was handled smoothly and worked out extraordinarily well for everyone involved. Anderson left before her rapidly escalating fame could create an imbalance in the show's dynamic, before her presence outside the series threatened to overshadow what was happening inside it. The series continued without missing a step. Her replacement kept the tool-time segments functioning exactly as they needed to, and Anderson moved on to projects that would make her globally famous. Looking back, her brief tenure on the show represents a perfect example of the right person being in the right place at exactly the right time, with the exit coming before the arrangement outlived its usefulness for either party. The departures that proved more complicated were the ones that happened after deep personal investment in the show had already taken root. Jonathan Taylor Thomas was, for a significant stretch of the 1990s, one of the most famous teenagers in America. His face appeared on magazine covers aimed at adolescent girls. His name drove ratings, and his presence on the show was genuinely central to its emotional appeal. When he chose to walk away near the end of the series run, the decision stunned virtually everyone in the industry who heard about it. The reasons were as human as anything the show itself ever explored. Thomas was exhausted from years of relentless work schedules that had consumed the years most people associate with simply growing up. He wanted to attend school like a normal person, to experience adolescence outside the machinery of television production, to reclaim some version of the ordinary life that fame had made impossible. What makes his exit so distinctive in the history of child stardom is how deliberate and self-aware it was. He wasn't pushed out, didn't flame out, and wasn't replaced against his will. He made a careful decision about what he valued and acted on it, trading guaranteed stardom for something that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. His departure also exposed tensions that had been building beneath the surface of what appeared to be a warm mentor and student relationship. After Thomas left the series, his relationship with Tim Allen became strained in ways that neither party seemed eager to discuss publicly. The friction reportedly influenced how Thomas's character was handled during the final season, with his reduced appearances reflecting something more complicated than simple scheduling conflicts. The on-screen father and son who had shared years of genuine warmth and comedic chemistry were navigating real distances that the cameras never captured. Time eventually provided a perspective that the moment couldn't. Both men have spoken about that period with more maturity and generosity in the years since, and the rift that once seemed significant has softened considerably. But knowing it existed at all adds layers to every scene of theirs you revisit. The knowledge that what looked like effortless family chemistry was always, at least in part, a performance. The young actors on the series carried burdens that went beyond the normal pressures of production schedules and public recognition. At some point during the show's run, families of the child cast members received explicit warnings about the dangers that accompany childhood celebrity. The message was direct and sobering. Fame attracts attention that isn't always safe or welcome, and young performers with recognizable faces become targets in ways that adults rarely have to confront. Stalkers, obsessive fans, and individuals with harmful intentions are drawn to famous children, and the families need to understand those risks fully in order to take appropriate precautions. The existence of these warnings is a reminder of the complicated reality behind the cheerful facade of a family sitcom. The three brothers who laughed and bickered and grew up on screen were, in their actual lives, navigating a world that required security awareness and constant vigilance. The warmth of the fictional Taylor household coexisted with pressures and dangers that never appeared in any episode. Those pressures manifested differently for each of the young actors as the years passed and the spotlight eventually moved on. Tara Noah Smith, who played the adorable youngest brother Mark throughout the show's entire run, found a transition out of childhood fame genuinely difficult. When the series ended, he was still a teenager, holding a fortune he wasn't equipped to manage and facing an adulthood that nobody had adequately prepared him for. Legal battles with his parents over his earnings became public in ways that exposed the complicated and sometimes painful dynamics that develop when children become primary breadwinners for their families. The guidance he received wasn't always sound, and the mistakes that followed were costly in ways that went well beyond financial losses. His story is painful precisely because there was nothing unusual about it. Child performers aging out of their famous roles and struggling to find solid ground is a pattern repeated throughout entertainment history, and Smith's experience fits that pattern with uncomfortable precision. What offers some redemption to the story is that it doesn't end in permanent disaster. Over time, Smith found his footing, worked toward reconciliation, and built something resembling stability from the wreckage of a difficult transition. Zachary Ty Bryan, who played the oldest Taylor brother Brad, encountered his own version of this difficulty through a different doorway. He left the series with money, name recognition, and the kind of opportunities that seemed to guarantee a smooth path into adult professional life. What he found instead was a business world that operates by entirely different rules in the entertainment industry, a world where teenage fame provides no particular advantage, and where inexperience can be exploited by people who recognize a wealthy young celebrity as an easy target. Investments that promised strong returns delivered painful losses. Trust was misplaced in people whose interests didn't align with his own. The education was costly in every sense, and the lessons it delivered came with consequences that linger for years. His experience illustrates something that the entertainment industry has demonstrated repeatedly across generations. The skills that make someone a successful child performer have almost nothing to do with the skills required to navigate adult professional and financial life, and the transition between those two worlds is far more treacherous than it appears from the outside. The show's cultural prominence during its peak years extended far enough to attract attention from places that television programs rarely reach. Serious discussions took place about having the sitting First Lady make a guest appearance on the series. The idea wasn't as outlandish as it might initially sound. Home Improvement was one of the most watched programs on American television, and its reputation as wholesome, family-friendly entertainment made it exactly the kind of platform that politicians and public figures recognized as valuable territory for connecting with ordinary households. An appearance by the First Lady would have been genuinely unprecedented, a crossover between the highest levels of American political life and one of the most popular fictional families the country had ever embraced. The cameo never came together despite the serious interest on both sides. Whatever combination of scheduling difficulties, political considerations, or logistical complications killed the idea, the fact that it was ever seriously contemplated says everything about the stature the show had achieved. Very few sitcoms in television history have ever generated that kind of institutional attention. Beneath all the public success, Tim Allen was managing a duality that most viewers never suspected existed. The Tim Taylor that audiences knew, bumbling and lovable and endlessly enthusiastic about grunt-worthy power, was a carefully constructed version of the actual performer. Allen's stand-up comedy, which continued throughout the show's run, operated in entirely different territory. His live performances were edgier, more adult, and far removed from the family-friendly warmth of the sitcom. Walking the line between these two public personas required constant awareness and careful management. Allen couldn't let the sitcom character completely swallow his comedy identity, but he also couldn't let his rougher material undermine the audience that made the show possible. Most fans who thought they knew Tim Allen were actually only familiar with one carefully curated version of him, while the other version was playing clubs and delivering material that would have surprised anyone who only knew him from Tuesday nights on ABC. The successful maintenance of this separation across 8 seasons of television represents one of the more quietly impressive achievements of his entire career. The series also spawned a video game adaptation that stands as one of the stranger artifacts of 1990s pop culture licensing. The game based on the show took everything familiar about the sitcom and replaced it with something almost unrecognizable. Rather than helping Tim Taylor navigate home improvement projects or interact with his family, players battled dinosaurs and worked through bizarre obstacle courses filled with inexplicable dangers. The disconnect between the source material and what the developers actually created was staggering by any measure. Nothing about a family sitcom involving a charming and competent handyman suggested the need for combat mechanics or prehistoric enemies. But that's exactly what audiences received. The game has become a curious piece of trivia, something that longtime fans reference with a kind of bewildered affection, proof that 1990s licensing operated on principles that prioritized brand recognition over any coherent connection to the property being exploited.